I moved into the building because it felt like a place that had already decided to survive. The stone facade was cracked but stubborn, the stair rails worn smooth by generations of hands. The mailboxes dented and practical, each slot swallowing the small lives of people who came and went. I signed the lease in a basement office that smelled of paper and old rain. The landlord slid the keys toward me without ceremony, his eyes never quite meeting mine. And when I asked about the 7th floor, he said there were 6. I didn't argue. I had seen the elevator panel. I had counted the buttons. But later that night, when I pushed a hand truck of boxes across the lobby and caught my reflection in the bronze directory, the etched numbers wavered, and for a breath or two there was a 7 where no 7 should be. The first week, I learned the rhythms of my new home, the hiss of ancient radiators in the morning, the tender complaint of pipes after midnight, the slap of newspapers against doors before dawn, the laugh that rose from the courtyard on weekends when someone remembered a song. I slept with the window cracked and the city's draft in my hair. On the 5th night, a sound found me that did not belong to those domestic hymns. It came thin and careful through the walls, like a secret remembering how to speak. A tap, then another, then a long scratch as if something drew a word across wood and had forgotten the meaning. I sat up, blankets folding into my lap, and realized the sound had a direction. It was above me. And above me there was nothing but the ceiling and the idea that the building ended where the landlord said it did. The next morning I asked my neighbor on the landing, a woman whose welcome mat read "Mind the keys." She smiled the smile people use when a storm is passing behind their eyes. "Old buildings are full of stories," she said, almost kind. "They don't all have the decency to end." I tried the super. A man with an iron ring of keys that chimed like a train when he walked. He pointed his chin toward the elevator. "We don't go up after 6, he said, as if I had asked about cigarettes or dogs. "Not unless it's moving day, and nobody moves up there anymore." I told myself a fiction about forgotten storage or sealed mechanical rooms. But the nights did not cooperate. The sounds continued in patterns that learned my breathing. Some evenings they persisted as a patient shuffling, a shape shifting its weight from one foot to the other on a floor that answered in dull complaint. Other nights they rose sudden and violent, the fast fists of panic on wood. A chair dragged across boards in a single ugly stroke. A muffled cry clipped short as if the building had placed a hand over a mouth. And sometimes those were worst. It was laughter. Not the laughter of a person who has found a joke and welcomed it, but the laughter of something that has found a person and bent them to its shape. It rang down the risers of the stairwell and pulled at the turn, where the light bulb always flickered. I made the mistake one night of standing at my door with my ear to the hallway and counting. The knocks came in 7s. 7 taps, a pause, 7, a longer pause, then 7 again. The counting steadied me the way a ledge steadies a climber. Numbers are polite. They never raise their voices. When the last set finished, the elevator cables thrummed inside their black throat as if answering a question. I dressed in yesterday's jeans, slid my feet into shoes, and told myself I was only going to the mailboxes. The corridor stretched blank and obedient, the bulbs buzzing in that register only nerves hear. When the elevator doors opened, someone had pressed 7. The button did not exist, but there it was, lit, a tiny wound in the brass. I let the doors close again and went back to my apartment, holding my mail like a charm that had forgotten its words. After that, the 7th floor revealed itself in shadows and reflected things. In the glass of the fire cabinet, the red axe and the coiled hose kept an extra company, a short hallway behind me. That did not belong to my floor, a door at the end of it with a number that should not be. In the polished steel of the elevator's inner doors, my face ghosted beside another Carter's lamps that had never been installed on 6. In the stairwell, the banisters curve buckled for a step where no landing was, as though the wood had remembered a place it was trained to forget. I began avoiding mirrors and polished surfaces, and the apartment seemed grateful. My reflection had become a second tenant with its own ideas. The story everyone tells in buildings like ours found me as stories do, wrapped in practical kindness. A note slid under my door in the steady hand of someone who has practiced how to be believed. "Don't go to door 7 after midnight," it read. "It does not lose." Below, smaller, "If you hear your name, it isn't yours." No signature, no flourish. I turned the paper over as if names might have bled through, and found my own fear reflected in the whiteness. I made tea I did not drink. I sat in the chair by the window and pretended the city's breath would keep the dark honest. At 1 o'clock, when the building's bones relaxed and the phones forgot to ring, something whispered my name in the timbre of a friend who had moved away, and I understood the note was not superstition but instruction. I lasted a month before I broke it. A month of footsteps above an unlisted floor. A month of counting in 7s. A month of laughter that stopped without a breath to end it. Curiosity is a patient illness. It feeds itself on our small obediences, then declares a holiday and takes the whole day. On that night, the elevator doors opened as soon as I pressed the call button. Doors already parting before I could wipe my palms on my thighs. The car smelled faintly of old flowers and penny metal. The panel showed 1 through 6, but my finger found the scene below them and pushed nothing. And the cable answered anyway. The car rose past the top of the building I knew, past the arithmetic of rent and leases and the language that keeps humans decent, and stopped with a softness that suggested courtesy rather than mechanics. When the door slid back, a corridor waited that looked exactly like ours if a careful hand had redrawn it for a dream. The same crown molding, the same uneven floor, the same light fixtures. But every bulb held darkness like water in a glass. The hallway was short. 3 doors on the right, 3 on the left, and at the end, a 7th, slightly offset, as if the building had built it in a hurry, then tried to pretend the measuring error was intentional. The brass 7 on the plaque was old enough to have learned patience. The wood wore scratches that had stories in them, long vertical scoring alongside wild, panicked arcs. A language written by rings and keys and nails and people who wanted more from wood than wood could give. I told myself that a locked door is a kind of kindness. It keeps two truths from colliding. Then something touched the other side, light and certain, 3 fingertips near the latch. Not a knock, an acknowledgement. I reached out and put my palm where the touch had been and met warmth. Not yours, I said, aloud to myself, to the note in my pocket, to the apartment below me that would notice if my keys fell under the bed, and never made another sound. But speaking is a permission slip, and the door treated it as such. From behind the wood came a sound like a mouth learning a new word. My name, spoken wrong at first, then corrected. It came from deep, as if the room on the other side were large and mostly empty and the name had to cross it to reach me. I stepped back and my body found the spring in the floorboard the way a tongue finds a sore tooth. The board creaked and the sound went down the hall and back. And I knew with that primitive knowing that the building knows its own noises. And the door knew mine now. I fled, and the door did not chase me. That would have been rude. The elevator returned me to 6 as if nothing were amiss. As if I had only been to the laundry room and back without finding anyone else's socks in the dryer. But the apartment had learned I had left it. The window's draft moved differently. The refrigerator's small engine coughed, then remembered it had work. I lay on the couch until dawn taught me the color of my ceiling. In the morning, my neighbor's welcome mat had changed its message. Mind the keys had become keep the keys. I bent and ran my finger over the letters. They were stitches, careful, recent. You can live a long time with a door at the top of your world whose voice you have heard. You can water plants and pay bills and answer emails and plan to visit beaches and parents. You can pick up your dry cleaning and text and read 3 chapters of a book and sleep with your phone an arm's length away. You can do all that while a wooden thing waits above you with breath held. I did. Weeks passed, marked by the elevator's polite obedience and the building's refusal to call the 7th floor by its name. Still, sometimes, in the hour when the hallway air loses confidence and the paint remembers the damp, I would hear a small weather inside the door, a draft rolling across floorboards, a piece of paper turning, someone shifting on a chair, the almost sound of a person deciding whether to stand. The super found me in the lobby one day and said without preface, "If you hear a child, that's the building. If you hear your mother, that's the door." His eyes were the color of old stone. "If you smell rain upstairs when there is no rain, that's the roof. If you smell the room you grew up in, that's the door. If you think you left something inside it, you didn't, it did." Then he looked at the ring of keys on his belt as if it were a rosary he had decided not to pray. "Don't ask me for a key. We don't keep that one. We don't keep what keeps us." The first time the door moved for me, it was a kindness. I had come to the 7th floor with nothing in my hands, a small courage bought with sleeplessness. I told myself I would listen and leave. I told myself I would not touch the latch, would not speak, would not answer. I stood with my shoulder against the cool wall and breathed with the building. The hall light nearest the door flickered the way a mind flickers when the name won't come. Then the lock turned on the other side to slow rotations, patient, careful until the bolt withdrew. The handle did not move. The door did not open. The lock simply gave up its argument with the frame and waited to see what I would do with the compromise. I turned and fled again because some mercies are teeth with a shawl tied over them. After that, the dreams began. Not nightmares, not the cheap theater of falling or being chased, but dreams so quiet I woke weeping because of their accuracy. In one, I stood in a room that held nothing but a chair and a door. The door had no number. The chair was placed so that if I sat, my knees would almost touch the wood. In another, a narrow window high on a wall let in a slice of light I recognized as automat for a clock, and dust floated in it with the gravity of small planets. I never saw the room entire. Only the pieces a camera would gather as it circled, a corner of skirting to worn by repeated sweeping. The small notch in the paint where a picture hook had been and then was not. The edge of a rug whose pattern had worn itself thin where heels turned toward the door. When I woke, my apartment had assembled itself into the same composition. The rug curled in the same place. The light learned the same slant. Dust made planets of itself as if practicing for the dream's audition. I tried to leave the building for good. The attempt was flamboyant lists, boxes, the whole theater of fresh starts. I loaded a truck with the heavier parts of my life and asked a friend to drive me to the other side of the city, where they say the streets are kinder to tired legs. When we reached the ramp to the highway, traffic stopped, not in the way that cars stop for reason, but in the way that time gives up for a while. While we waited among the braked metal animals, I checked my phone out of habit. The map pulsed its little blue dot where my apartment should be, not where the truck was. I zoomed in. The building's outline was there, delicately drawn. A tiny symbol marked a stairwell. I swiped. The view lifted to an axonometric cut, the kind developers use for hungry eyes, and in that drawing, on the 7th layer, where no line should be, was a door. I shut the app and handed the phone to my friend as one hands a hot glass. "It's an old building," he said kindly, not looking. I did not move. The truck returned to the curb behind our lobby door, and the relief I felt was an admission I did not deserve. I took my boxes back upstairs as if I had allowed someone to change a mind I had not made honestly. When I reached my hall, the light over my door hummed in the frequency of welcome. On the floor in front of the apartment opposite mine lay a small, wrapped parcel with no name. I should have walked past. The paper was brown and ordinary, the string tied in the impatient knot of someone who raps with their thumb pressed hard. I bent and lifted it because the day had already surrendered. Inside the paper, wrapped in tissue, lay a key. It was not old. It was not ceremonial. It was a practical key of new-cut brass with a notch pattern my hand learned in an instant. A thin tag tied through a hole read, in that practiced hand, only 7. The right thing to do with keys we are not supposed to have is to find the person who should have them. The second best thing is to drop them down a storm grate and let the city do the deciding. I did neither. I held the key between forefinger and thumb and felt the newness of it. The clean edges not yet rounded by a pocket. The crisp shoulder not yet softened by an impatient lock. I went to bed with the key on the table beside the lamp. All night I listened to the building locate itself around me. When I woke, if I woke, mornings had begun to feel like minority opinions. The key had moved a small distance across the table as if a vibration had urged it east. I lay very still and watched it resume its stillness. You can rehearse every safety in the world and still find yourself standing at a door. That is learning your name. I went up at noon, which is supposed to belong to the living. The elevator side at the 7th floor, doors parting with the courtesy of a Mactor D. The corridor smelled of old varnish and the sweetness that wood makes when it wants to be forgiven for outlasting its first purpose. I stood in front of door no. 7 and said nothing. Silence is a language too. The lock betrayed its exhaustion with a small rattle as if clearing its throat to be generous. I slid the key in. It went home with a satisfaction that made the muscles between my shoulder blades cold. I did not turn it. The key sat there, the teeth ready to declare their allegiance. Through the wood came a sound I had never heard and yet knew someone standing up. After waiting a very long time, the door opened inward an inch without my hand. Not a throw, not a theatrical swing. An inch, the difference between no and not yet. From the inch came a draft that was not a draft, the breath of a room. It smelled of paper that has been folded and unfolded until the fibers are the memory of hands. It smelled of chalk on fingers and the leather polish people used when chairs were promises. It smelled, faintly and absolutely, of rain that had fallen long ago and decided to remain. A strip of darkness the color of closed eyes showed along the jamb. In that strip, movement, the way a shadow moves when what casts it is not interested in being named. I leaned forward until my forehead felt the cold of brass near the latch. On the other side, someone leaned too. To people who had never met, separated by wood and rules, I closed it. I turned the key back out. I left the 7th floor and returned the key to its tissue as if it were a buried tooth. In a child's room, I placed the parcel under my bed, where we store the things we promise ourselves we have discarded. For a week the building was mercy itself. The knocks paused. The laughter declined to attend. The elevator obeyed the arithmetic of rent again. I made soup. I answered emails with the dignity of paragraphs and salutations. I found the rhythm again by which human beings keep one another. On the 8th night, the super knocked on my door and asked if the radiator banged. "Not tonight," I said. "Good," he replied. Sometimes the old ones start speaking when weather changes, then he put a hand on the doorframe. his fingers finding old paint, and lowered his voice as if telling me where spare fuses lived. "If you ever go in," he said, "don't close it behind you." He left before I could say I had not. One evening, around the hour when dinner is either a kindness or a ritual, I heard the names again. Not mine this time, but the soft calling of a list in a voice that did not expect an answer. The door above me was taking roll. A name from a story I knew, a name from an obituary I had read, a name from a mailbox that had a new label now. A name that tasted like my grandmother's kitchen when the light bent low across her table. A name that felt like a street I had walked in another city. After each, a small silence, as if listening for breath. The count went on, not rising, not falling, the patter of rain remembered by a roof. At last it reached the name I would have had if my parents had won their argument. The name on an old hospital bracelet in a showbox. And the floor under my feet accepted the weight of truth with a sigh. I went back up with nothing but my hands. The elevator was the only witness that mattered. It slid open on the floor that was not allowed to exist. And the corridor accepted me as if things had been arranged weeks ago. The door waited, the brass 7 unpersuaded by my small fear. I held the key for a long time before I offered it to the lock. When the bolt withdrew, it did so like an old soldier removing a hat. The inch opened again. The room gave me its breath. And this time, enough light from the hall traveled over the threshold to show me that the floor inside was wood, worn to soft grain by the turn of 1,000 heels in one place near the door. That turn had a story. It had the gentle radius of someone polite enough to come and go without making the world rearrange. "May I said, because manners are the last defense against magic. The door did not answer, which is the correct answer. I pushed it a second inch, then a third. Beyond lay a space that did not feel large but did not feel small. Rooms lose interest in such things at a certain age. A rug, the kind that once was precious and had since chosen to be useful, kept company with a wall of books that had already read their readers. A chair sat a little open to the door so that someone could sit and turn their knees toward welcome. A table showed a pale square where a paper had rested for a long time. The paper itself was gone. On the wall opposite me hung a picture frame with no picture. Its glass clean and reflective like a pond after wind gives up. And at the near edge of my vision, where the mind borrows its own fear to fill in blindness, a figure, the suggestion of someone whose posture had been learned from waiting. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to be safe. I did not look directly. There are rules for looking. I kept my gaze on the hinge, and in the corner of my eye the someone remained, not insisting, not shy. The building learned our shared breath, adjusted a vent, shifted a pipe, made its small domestic peace. I stood with the door against my shoulder and felt the weight of it like a friend's hand. And if I tell you I cried, it is not because I was sad. It was because the room smelled like the exact afternoon in childhood when my mother braided my hair and told me we were not going to the party after all. And I felt, with terrible clarity, how every door in my life had been a rehearsal for this one. I did not cross the threshold. You think I did, because stories have to go somewhere, because doors exist to be crossed. But I did not. I stood there until my body remembered thirst and my knees remembered that they were not made for devotion. I closed the door without letting the latch catch. I left the key in the lock as if I were leaving a hand on someone's sleeve. I rode the elevator down and sat on my kitchen floor and watched the kettle boil. And boil without whizzing. That night, when the taps came, they were gentler. As if I had taught the door how to be kind, or it had taught me how to hear. I slept on the couch because the bed felt like an argument I could not win. Days turned into a corridor of their own, light and dark, placing their feet in the same prints. Sometimes I went up to the 7th floor and stood with my palm on the wood, and counted the breadths of 2 rooms separated by a hinge. Sometimes I stayed below and listened to the building teach the rain its old tricks. Twice I found things outside my door that did not belong to me: a small photograph of a woman whose face had resigned from being recognized, and a button that matched none of my clothes. I put them on the table beside the lamp and apologized to them because I could not find where they wanted to be. I know the story you expect. I unlock the door and enter, and the room closes over me like water. I vanish, and my mail stops, and my name fades from records. And my neighbor's mat says different words. Perhaps that is the truest ending and I have already reached it. Perhaps this is the sound a room makes when it writes a letter to itself and folds it into the wall. Perhaps I am no longer downstairs and the kettle has learned a different whistle. But I will tell you what I know as if it were all that matters. The door does not hunt. It waits. It keeps the hours the way a careful person keeps a promise. It learns your shape by the pressure your feet make on the boards outside it. It learns your name by how you flinch when it is spoken wrong and then right. It invites the way weather does. It opens a window on another floor and lets you discover the draft. If you find yourself in a building that lists 6 floors and remembers 7. If you hear a laughter that ends without the decency of breath. If someone leaves you a note that says don't answer when your name is spoken from wood, fold the paper and put it in your pocket and carry it like a charm that knows you doubt it. If a key arrives wrapped in tissue that smells of a room you loved and left, hold it and do not turn it at midnight. Go at noon, speak to the hinge. Ask the latch to remember the hands that made it. If the door opens an inch, accept the inch. If a room breathes and gives you the smell of old rain, breathe it and remember the faces you have practiced forgetting. Do not close the door behind you if you step inside. Do not, even if you think you are only visiting. Some doors are not between rooms. They are between versions of yourself, and they do not like to count the same person twice. I still live here, or I live someplace that has the same address. I still pay rent, and the super still nods in the lobby and carries a choir of keys. And the woman across the hall still changes her mat when the weather turns. I still cook too much soup and freeze the rest and forget it. But there is a place above my ceiling where my name is written on air in a hand. I have learned to trust. There is a floor that opens when the building believes I will be polite. There is a door that does not lose because it does not play. And there is a room that smells of rain that has chosen to remain if I vanish. Remember this, I did not go because the door dragged me. I went because there is a sound the world makes on the other side of wood, when it leans against itself and forgives. I went because the knocks came in sevens and taught me how to count to the end of a day. I went because I left the key where keys belong and the lock learned the pleasure of agreement. I went because there has always been a room at the end of a hall, in every house I have ever loved. And at last one of them learned my name and said it right. If you hear your own name from behind wood and it is spoken in the voice of someone, you have been in the past or will be tomorrow. Put your hand against the grain and feel how trees remember wind. Put your ear to the panel and let the building teach you the oldest lesson it knows. Some doors are not open, they open. And when they do, the kindest thing you can do is stand for a while and breathe the old rain in and leave the latch unlatched, so that the person you were when you arrived can find their way out again if they need to.